Afternoon, and we'll call this meeting of the Humboldt County Association of Governments Board to order. And at this time, we'll ask for a roll call, please.
Chair Johnson,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Shull,
Here.
Supervisor Madrone,
Present.
Mayor Burgell, Councilmember Atkins Salazar,
Here.
Councilmember Jorgensen,
Here.
Councilmember West,
Here.
Councilmember Orr,
Here.
Pack Member Arroyo,
Here.
Pack Member Allstrand.
Here.
Thank you. At this time, we will adjourn as of the HCOG board and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And our first order of business is public comment on non-agenda items. Is there any public comment? I don't see any. I don't see any online. So we will move to presentations. And at this time, we'll have a presentation on perceptions of trail safety in Humboldt County with our Supervisor Arroyo, our PAC member.
Thank you. I don't often get a chance to stand on this side of the dais. This is fun. So I have a presentation to pull up with slides to talk to you about this. So I recently earned my master's degree in natural resources with a focus on environmental science and management from Cal Poly Humboldt, the department in which I teach, so that was fun. And I had a chance to talk to people about their perception of trails. Amy, do you have my slides? No problem. Oh, good. You're doing a lot of things. So I'm going to walk you through a presentation about my findings and a little bit about why I studied this. So let me just make sure. Okay. And if any of you are familiar with the university, those were my committee members, Dr. Lori Richmond, my advisor, Dr. Aaron Kelly, and Dr. Stephen Martin. Aaron Kelly has a background in forestry, and Stephen Martin has a background in recreation. And then Lori really focuses a lot on planning and human dimensions of design and environment. So together they really formed a great committee. All right, so I think I don't need to tell you too much about the benefits of trails, but I really did focus on laying out some of the background information about benefits in the document itself, which some of you may find useful in the future when you go to refer to benefits of trails for your communities. I really focused on some of the environmental, public health, and socioeconomic benefits. And then looked at the body of research about trails and safety from an architecture and design perspective, which really emphasizes how more people using public spaces makes other people feel more safe. From a rural transportation planning standpoint, so I did reference some HCOG source material in there, as well as other areas. So about how funding active transportation in rural areas really results in a similar use of those active modes, but it's lesser investment. So there's this greater impact proportionate to the investment in some rural and tribal communities that I found in the literature. Looking from an economics and realty perspective, that trails have a positive impact on the commercial and residential areas that they are near, that really outweighs the negative impacts. And then from a social science perspective, because I was studying people's perception, I looked at research around why perception is important and it matters and how it can be changed. So really I was motivated to study this. Some of you may know this and some of you may not, but in my prior to being a supervisor, I worked for 15 years for Redwood Community Action Agency, and Supervisor Madrone and I have that in common, although we worked there at different times. He really led the way on a lot of these trail planning projects before I was there. But I got a chance to work on trail planning, funding, design, community engagement projects over the course of many years. And a lot of this disconnect came from my work in those spaces. So all over the world and nation and throughout time, there's really A lot of documentation about trails in publicly accessible open space areas, including greenbelts and parks, having lower incidences of crime if there is particularly if there's infrastructure for public access. And yet, the top thing that I would hear over and over again about trails and people's fears about new trails was around safety, and people expressed a lot of confidence that the region was somehow different and that this body of research elsewhere couldn't apply to us. So I wanted to dig into whether or not the findings were similar here. So you've probably seen a lot of this type of talk online and in the media locally. This on the top right, the Facebook post, "The homeless highway is almost done." This was about the Eureka Waterfront Trail, and in the comments someone says, "Do you mean the community access trail that connects Arcata to Eureka?" And so this narrative is pretty pervasive around trails in the community. On the bottom left, someone really exhorting planners to plan for safety and to address safety issues. And then some headlines talking about some lawsuits and a local safety issue that was connected to trails, which ultimately I believe was not found to have a strong trail connection, but that made the headline. So I sought to research how Humboldt County community members perceive safety on and near trails, what factors affect this, and then how these perceptions affect the ways that people use and value trails. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, and I think you all have a copy of a link to my thesis, which is really exhaustive. If you have further questions, I'm happy to answer them afterwards as well. So my study sites were the Hickshari Trail in Eureka and the Hammond Trail in McKinleyville. Selected in part because of the places where they are. The neighborhood in McKinleyville, I chose to about a mile of the Hammond Trail that goes right behind people's homes. And on the Hickshari Trail, I chose that in part because of its proximity to businesses and homes, and then both are part of the California Coast Roads Trail and the Great Redwood Trail to some degree or another. The trail planning background, I'm not going to go into much. A lot of you are probably familiar with that, but a long history of trail planning efforts and uses in those areas that predated the trail. So this data came from the county, and it is, I will note that the Eureka Waterfront Trail counter in blue that shows the number of people using the trail it is outside of my study area. It's just slightly outside of my study area, but it's the closest I had. So you can see that the Hammond Trail sees on average, about double the users that the Eureka Waterfront Trail sees, and that the majority of those users on the Hammond Trail in particular are on the weekends. But on the Eureka Waterfront Trail, it's, Wednesday and Sunday are about the same. So there's not necessarily that pattern quite as strongly. So I used a mixed methods approach, talking with people on the trails. So I used an intercept survey, and I had 198 unique responses and 15 additional interviews where I went into more depth with individuals with experience in these locations to understand how they've changed over time. So surveyors, including myself and a couple of student research assistants, asked all adult trail users if they were willing to take a survey, so we didn't randomize it like every third user or anything like that. Most people completed it electronically, and the point was really to catch people while they were having their trail experience and it was fresh in their minds. So people were asked to do it immediately or as soon as they could after they got home, that kind of thing. And we did see, we could track in real time how quickly people were doing it. And then there was some additional outreach that I had to do to bicycle commuter groups. We learned pretty quickly that people who were bicycle commuting, who you could usually recognize because they had seemed like they were carrying all the things they needed for work and they were dressed for work. And by and large, I could identify some of those folks, didn't seem to want to stop to take a survey, which makes sense. So I did outreach to them in additional ways. So there were 12 multiple choice Likert scale type questions where there were numeric, a range of numeric responses, 9 open-ended narrative questions, some demographic questions, and then just a consent to participate. So the Likert skill questions were things like, how likely are you to bring people you care about here? Recommend that they use the trail on a scale of 0 to 5. And then open-ended questions were things like, what do you wish that public agencies or volunteers would change about this space? Interviews were semi-structured, so I asked about 15 standard questions, but was able to deviate a little bit if there was stuff that was particularly interesting or that I wanted to understand further. From the interviewees, 3 were in law enforcement, 3 in other government agencies, 3 were residents living adjacent to trails. I had nonprofit service providers and community volunteers, and then 2 private business owners who were adjacent to trails. And I decided to keep these anonymous and invited people to do them anonymously, so I'm not going to name them here or in the document. So at a glance, some survey takeaways. The majority of folks were residents of Humboldt County, 94%, vast majority. 22% of survey participants identified their race as other than white. They were 62% age 51 or older, 45% identified as female, and then the vast majority were also using the trail for recreation and wellness purposes, although I'll say that there's a little caveat around that with the difficulty in outreach to people who are using it for transportation to some degree. And then most feel that they're really engaged in local decisions about infrastructure, transportation, and land use. It was pretty quick for people to complete these surveys, and again, I got almost 200 unique responses, which was a pretty good response rate. So most folks came to the trails to be outside, to exercise, to socialize. You can see about 2/3 of the way down, that's the transportation line. So fairly small number of folks really specifically said that they were using that for transportation from work or school or to do errands, but not insignificant. So the real big question was, how safe did people feel? And the mean on the Hickshari Trail was a 3.74 out of from a 0 to 5 scale. And my stats-minded folks were very upset that I chose a 0 through 5 6-point scale instead of an uneven number there, because ultimately I counted 0 as an integer. So that was frustrating to folks. But anyway, and the Hammond Trail, you can see that more people specifically selected an answer of 5 on that 5.0 to 5 scale. But still, those are a lot of responses well above that kind of middle point, which is marked by the red line. I asked people how they defined safety in their own words, and these answers were very interesting in that they were very varied. So everything from, people's safety from crime or safety from physical harm imposed by another person, to the sense of psychological safety that people derive from having kind of good interactions with others. I really like this quote, being left alone by anyone who's unable to smile and wish me a good day as I do them. That's how someone defined safety. Other people referred to having a dog or having people with them. And then we have the response I identify as Chuck Norris on here. The bottom one, safety is strictly self-confidence in your ability to defend yourself. So quite kind of a wide array of perspectives on safety. And I will say the second response there, really specifically identifies a concern about being hit by someone on a bike, which we'll come back to. So out of those 15 interviewees, 13 explicitly said that they would describe the trail as safe, the trail that they were on. And those were roughly split between the Hammond and the Hickshari, or people who had experience working on both. And it was really seen as variable and contextual. So a lot of, context was, the time of day mattered substantially, as well as whether there were other people with the person or not. And one person said, I never felt unsafe in this place, but I did feel like I needed to keep my guard up more, or identifying that gut reaction is a big part of people's perception of safety. So with the demographic questions, I was able to identify a couple of factors that were significant in people's perception of safety. And one of them was identification as, quote, non-white, which was either people who self-identified as a race other than white, or who selected Hispanic or Latino ethnicity. And on the Hammond Trail, you can see there was not a, you can see those arrow bars at the top, not a statistically significant difference, but on the Hickory Trail there was. So with non-white self-identified users feeling less safe. I also asked people to identify their, self-identify their political ideology on a spectrum, and there was a relationship between the people's feeling of safety and their political ideology, with people who identified as more right-leaning feeling less safe overall on both trails, but more markedly less safe on the Hickory Trail. Gender identity and age actually did not significantly or statistically affect the perception of safety on the trail in my study. And the demographics really mirrored Humboldt County's demographics. I looked pretty closely at the census data around Humboldt County and for these communities to figure that out. There were unprompted observations about income in 6 of the interviews, noting that the Hammond Trail lies in an area that is more affluent. And accessibility arose. Also people made observations about some trail users, their perceptions of other trail users having low incomes. So that came up in kind of both ends of that spectrum. Accessibility arose also unprompted in 5 of the interviews and 27 of the narrative responses to survey questions. So I didn't have questions around accessibility in the demographic portion. There's always a challenge to whether you add more questions or fewer questions, and you want people to complete your survey, so I opted to make it a little simpler. Most were recreational users, again, like I said. More than 45% use these trails at least weekly, so they're quite familiar with these areas. And there were a lot of comments about the positive changes over time as a result of trail construction, such as this one: marked difference in the atmosphere on the trail when compared to the unregulated green space of the past. So another cool finding that I was really excited about was that 60% of respondents said that they would travel more than 2 miles round trip for transportation purposes. And this was explicit. I wasn't asking about for fun. I was asking about for transportation to access goods, services, or destinations that are important to you. And I think this is the meat of what's exciting about my particular study for this group, is that, I'm sorry, this got cut off, but that line at the top is greater than 2 or greater miles round trip. So people are willing to use these for transportation purposes. People do recall, or I should say 77% of people who recalled the pre-trail condition described it as safer now, and 21% said it was about the same. And within that, there were nested some responses of people who were like, well, you know, I kind of always feel safe. I realize not everyone feels that way, but I usually feel safe. So, you know, it's about the same. And there were these nuances of the trail is an improvement, but I have always felt safe, that kind of thing. On the Hammond Trail, there were a few comments about, you know, pre-existing conditions prior to the trail, and, you know, camping, poaching, and that the trails brought public scrutiny. On the Hickory Trail, some observations about, you know, what it was like before, people engaging in illicit behaviors in those spaces. Hi, Kim.
Hi.
Great to see you. I think
You too.
I think my clicker got deactivated by your clicker. Perfect. I think I'm good. Yep, I'm back. All right. And just a couple of quotes that I wanted to pull out that I think are relevant. You know, people feel unsafe when they can't see what's around them. So maintenance has made a really big difference. One person, this was someone who owned a business near a trail. I had my doubts about the trail, and the situation varies based on the seasons and the economy, but I remember it before and it was a totally lawless place. This isn't perfect, but it's better. And then one more about the transformation between the days before the trail and today being so significant. And this was actually from law enforcement, acknowledging that police visits didn't change the outcome as a whole, but having the public use these areas has demonstrated a more effective way to manage these public places. So that was really powerful to hear. And I actually initially planned to use call for service data, which is calls for law enforcement responses, and quickly found that not only has the data management system changed over the years so that there isn't a lot of robust long-term data that I was able to access, but also a lot of times when people call for service and they don't specifically say they're on a trail, it was hard to identify those and pull those out. So one person might say, I'm over on the bluffs in McKinleyville, and another person might say I'm on the Hammond Trail. And if those aren't, if there's no way to pull out that information, it was pretty difficult to obtain. So pretty incredible responses to the question, how valuable or important is this trail to you? Again, this is split by Hickshari and Hammond, with Hickshari being that kind of reddish color and Hammond being the blue are on the right. So quite high ratings of perception of value that people placed on these trails. How likely are you to bring people that you care about here or recommend that they use the trail? This doesn't have the mean that we could compare to the first question about perception of safety, but it's interesting to me that the mean was higher actually for this question than people's own feeling of safety. So they're like, I know those are kind of comparing apples and oranges, but I still think it's interesting that people are like, yeah, I would absolutely tell my friends and family to go to these trails, even though I might have, some reservations personally. So that, I don't know if that speaks to whether there's a perception that people would go in a group or something different, but it was an interesting finding. This is me skating on the Hickshari Trail, maybe even before it was open, sorry. And loving it on my first time able to skate on a long continuous trail, that was freshly paved, pretty amazing. So I also asked people to use 3 words to describe the trail, and this was another fun one. I didn't expect it to be as exciting as it was as far as the responses, but the number of positive words used was, far, far greater than the number of negative words used. There were also some that I kind of threw out as neutral or hard to interpret, but some examples for the Hickshari include continuous, welcoming, important, for the Hammond, life-saving dog walk, and then long, dirty, and cold for the Hickshari, and cyclist war zone for the Hammond Trail. So you can see it's all over the place. But it was interesting to see that the perceptions, by and large, were so positive. So the things that really mattered most for feeling of safety and how that can be managed was really other users' presence and their behavior. Are people using the trail appropriately? But really, by and large, just a volume of people in these public spaces really made a significant difference. The physical condition of the trail, its surfacing, litter, et cetera, was also significant. Unleashed dogs were a factor. I will note that HCOG did a lot of trail safety related outreach right after I did my study, and I was excited to see that. But that did come right after I completed my study, and a lot of these things were factored into that outreach. So leashing dogs, bicyclists, and passing behaviors in general, courteousness were all covered in that outreach campaign. But those were factors that came up. Visible trash and vandalism, of course, were significant, but really dense or overgrown vegetation restricting visibility was one of the top factors. So Hammond Trail users really did express greater feelings of safety than Hickshari Trail users. People weren't asked to compare the two, and I didn't really dig too much into the causality, but I will note that the Hammond Trail was built quite a bit earlier than the Hickshari. The location is more affluent, and it has nearly twice as many users. So those are all, I believe, compelling factors. So by and large, takeaways, people really valued these trails. They described them with predominantly positive language. They have a high level of knowledge about these places. Those who were responding to this use the trails often, and we're also able to provide abundant critique. So the full list of everything that they would like to see changed was extensive, but I think I've summarized it pretty well. 95% of Hammond Trail users feel safe on the trail, and 82% of Hickshire Trail users feel safe on the trail, and 80% would use the trail for transportation, with, again, most saying that they would travel 2 miles or greater on trails. And there were those differences in perception based on identity-based factors. So surfacing improvements were definitely noted, particularly around accessibility as well as markings, although there wasn't agreement about what the markings should symbolize, whether a center line should symbolize direction of travel or type of user. So the responses were split between those, but definitely I liked the idea of center line striping. And then signage was a key piece of it so that people have even more information when they're using the trail so they don't get disoriented. General maintenance and possibly surveillance. This was another one where there was split input on it. Some people felt that there should be more surveillance and some people felt that that was intrusive. And there was really a lot of focus on the Hickshire on trash cleanup and on the Hammond on vegetation maintenance. Some users really expressed a lot of interest in having alternative response numbers to 911 and who to contact for different, say, a maintenance need or an unleashed dog need versus, perhaps a mental health need. And so those resources being available was an interest. An increase in the formal trail patrols. So the Volunteer Trail Stewards program is one, but there was interest in a community ambassador program similar to what Arcata has to expand that a bit. And then that analysis of call for service data, so there's more clear information about what's coming into dispatch about trails. And then, of course, funding solutions. We always need funding. Really focusing on encouragement activities, so free permits or small grants to support public gatherings and trail areas and attract new users in particular. My study was really with existing users or people who at least felt that they wanted to come to the trail on the day that I happened to be surveying. So it's not really recruiting or asking about new user experiences particularly. Safety training, and then information similar to what HCOG has been providing recently about appropriate trail uses. And there was also a lot of interest in documenting these projects and areas over time. So I did get some support from the Humboldt Trails Council, which in turn got support from the Humboldt Bay Trail Fund. And then I had student research assistants who I like to shout out whenever I can, Katie Miller and Zachary Meyer. And then I certainly looked at the body of, documentation that HCOG has produced and other public agencies locally, as well as all over the nation. There's some great stuff out there. And I really made an effort to push back against my advisors to have as much robust information as possible. They wanted me to streamline the intro. And I wanted you all to have, and many of my fellow, trail advocates and planners to have information about, this body of research that I'm referring to. And so there's a ton of that lives in the document. My thesis is available to all of you and it's available online, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
No. Thank you for that. And is there any questions or comments? Yes.
Great work.
Thanks, Steve. You're an inspiration. Steve really did so much work on the Hammond.
Yes.
I just wanted to add to that. I thought it was terrific. I told her I read the whole thing last night, so it was. I'm on the trail. I'm working on a trail committee in Trinidad, so this has been good stuff. And the one thing there were two things I really took out of it. One was just when you think about why have trails, this is a really good thing to look at and say this is why people need to put in trails, what the purpose of trails are. And I thought I did a really good job of making it clear that these are very important in order to make a city work and give people a chance. So I thought that was terrific. And the other thing was just when I had a youth race at Hickshire, we couldn't get people to come because they were so scared of having their kids on that trail. And it seemed like it really got cleaned up, but recently it looks like it's kind of getting camping everywhere. And so people I talked to were saying how it's really falling apart. So I think one of the other things is if you're going to have that much money put into trails and they're so important, how do you make sure people feel like they can go out there and be safe. And I think that whole homeless camps that are out there are making people feel uncomfortable again. So it's really sad because that is an absolutely gorgeous trail. I love it. And so I'd really like to see this find a way to make sure we do the best at making people feel better about being on them. But
Yeah.
thank you. That was a fantastic. I think you did a great job.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, one of the things I think is interesting, and the Humboldt Bay Trail Fund was really developed to help with those maintenance needs, but there's always, an outsized maintenance need as compared to what funding is available. And it is, we in putting on my government hat, we see, we see over and over again that, the funding is often there for a one-time capital improvement, a new project or program, and then sustaining that. And the operational funding is just so hard to come by. I'm sure we all see that in every agency. So I agree with you. And I don't know what mechanisms there are. I didn't make it a part of my research this time around to understand, what mechanisms there might be to increase that maintenance funding over time, but it is something that I think this board could look at.
Yes, Supervisor Madrone.
Well, I really appreciate your work on this, Natalie, and the data that was collected, and the whole concept that if we get more people out there using it, then many of the problems will go away. Over the years, we've all heard the comments that, well, trails have all these problems associated with them, whether it's homeless camps or other kinds of things, bikes going too fast, or people using them as a route to do burglaries and then run off with stuff. And it's like, you never hear that about roads, though. Nobody ever says, those roads are bad because they create all these problems. And yet, truly, the vast majority of all these problems happen on roads. And it's just interesting how people have always kind of blamed trails for these things. And it really has nothing to do with the trail being at fault. It has to do with us as society and the issues we're all dealing with. Also, the Humboldt Trails Council is a fantastic element of operation and maintenance in that they're a total volunteer organization and could use more support, but they provide these trail volunteer days on the Hammond Trail, on Hickshari, on the Arcata trails, and so many other places. In fact, they're also going to be involved with the Bay Trails as well. So if you have time on the weekend, sign up for one of those. It's great groups of people that get out there and help maintain these trails. So anyway, thank you for your work.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned the Trail Stewards because I will say I was the board president of the Humboldt Trails Council for several years and really passionate about that program. And a big part of, what the Humboldt Trails Council does is pay for the liability insurance for volunteers because even volunteer programs aren't free. So covering those needs for supplies and insurance that are so necessary to make that program work. It is a great organization, but I also want to, obviously note that there are hundreds of people that contribute thousands of volunteer hours to the maintenance needs of trails, and they are an incredible asset, and that has helped to leverage some of the funding to get trails built, is to say, well, there's going to be this amount of volunteer labor put in over time, so that's really key, and without those I'm not sure we'd see the proliferation of trails that we even have so far. I will note one more thing that you mentioned about roads, reminded me that I didn't emphasize it in my presentation. It was in there, but it was a minor part, was that there were quite a number of comments from people who said the thing that they thought about with respect to safety was not being hit by a car. So being on a separated trail that, was not a shared transportation corridor with motorized vehicles was a significant impact on people's perception of safety. Particularly for those commuters and people who identified their use as transportation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, just one other thought. The Great Redwood Trail. Once it's completed, it's going to be the longest rail trail in the United States. And it really is an interesting interface with our transportation systems because, as we know, over time, there's been a big push to be able to get to the Bay Area quicker, right? So we've widened the highways. We've bypassed towns like Willits recently, Cloverdale, Ukiah, decades ago. There was the big plan to bypass Eureka, right? Well, it went away, and we have seen a lot of other improvements happen instead of that one. But what's really interesting is in our highway construction, we're kind of leaving towns behind from an economic perspective. When we bypass the towns, it has a big impact on the economy of that community. Whereas the Great Redwood Trail, The railroad goes right through these towns. So the Great Redwood Trail is actually going to bring in massive economic support to all of these little communities, including remote towns like Alder Point, Fort Seward, and others out in the canyon. That will take quite a while to get that part of the trail together. But I think we've already seen, with the Bay Trail, with the Hammond, Hickshari, and others, how it benefits the community economically as an important part of our transportation and economic systems. So the master plan is just about wrapped up. It's a tremendous amount of work that went into that, and it's going to be unveiled in a couple of weeks. It's an amazing document. It's like 500 pages, tremendous detail, of course, on many projects. We're going to have to drill down further as we get to them. But, a lot of the projects are starting in the urban areas, like Eureka's Waterfront Trail, incredible effort by the city of Eureka and Arcata's components and the rest of it. So just very exciting stuff, trails, really important pieces to our transportation system and our economies. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for noting that. I did think about that when selecting trail segments for this study. I was thinking about the Great Redwood Trail and how there are concerns from people who live adjacent to the trail. And so trying to find, it was hard to find representative segments close enough to study. But part of the idea with picking those two trails was that because they do go actually both of them go close to homes as well as businesses, there was a bit of an opportunity to understand how those individuals felt about having those uses so close to their door. And I will say, just with respect to the document itself, I know it's a little, I'm not the least biased person. I mean, I am the former, board chair of the Humboldt Trails Council, and obviously I'm very passionate about transportation, have a long background in trail planning, but I did still, have this, I would say framework to work within that was, academic research focused, to really try to lend some credibility to this, this data that I think can be used by all of you and by HCOG in the future for talking about, the need for trails and alternative modes of transportation. So thanks for your time.
Thank you. We'll give him a minute to sit down before we start. All right. Well, thank you for that. And I plan on looking at some of the data you've got in there as we look forward in Fortuna to the John Campbell Trail and tying in with the Bear River Band and some of the monument signs we're looking at, such as that. So at this point, we come to the consent calendar. We have 4 items: approval of the meeting record, SS TAC membership appointments and terminations, revised SS TAC bylaws, and a County of Humboldt request for $25,000 local match funding for Chishtang Road and Airport Road studies for safety. And does anyone like to pull anything? And any public comment? I see none online.
I would move approval of the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay, we move on to, at this time, by motion, we will reconvene as the HCOG board and approve the PAC recommendations.
Move to reconvene.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So we come now to action items and authorization for the executive director to complete the Redwood Region Resilient Inclusive Sustainability Economy partnership agreement letter. I'll cut it a little bit short and give you time for the staff report.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, this is a request to, like you said, authorize me to sign this partnership agreement for what's known as the Redwood Region RISE program. And this is a program that is part of California's Jobs First, and it's coordinated by the Center for Rural Policy, for the most part, out of Cal Poly. We do have a speaker here this evening, Leonie Four, who's going to be, she's with the Center for Rural Policy. She's actually going to give you an overview of the whole program. My guess is that some of you have been on email lists. The program's been going on for a little bit, but it's kind of quite complicated in its structure. So I think Leonie's presentation will help us understand kind of the framework of it. And then what's being asked of us, they've asked if HCOG will become part of the voting member block as we move forward with the program. Our counterparts in Mendocino County, they do already participate. They've done the same resolution and or given the same authorization, and they participate as the voting member block. And I have been kind of tracking the program. I do believe we have capacity to participate as voting members. I think that, you'll hear more about kind of the structure of it, but one of the great things about it, because it is focused on these sustainable jobs, I think there's a lot of interface with our safe and sustainable transportation targets. And it's a really great place to kind of bring up some of the needs we have when it comes to promoting converting to zero emission fleets and the kind of workforce we're going to need for that, the kind of jobs that we're going to need to support that, just to kind of bring that transportation perspective in, and make sure that they're aware of, kind of the transportation focus needs around those topics. So with that, I'll turn it over to Leonie. She can give us a presentation and we can have a discussion.
Right. Hi, everyone. I hope, is it on? I think so. Hi. So this is definitely my first formal meeting in this kind of capacity. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Redwood Region RISE. You're going to see a lot of acronyms, so please bear with me. I'm going to try to walk you through it. I have 10 minutes. It's a lot, so maybe if you can ask the questions at the end, I'm going to hopefully walk you through it. So my name, again, Leonie Four. I'm at the California Center for Rural Policy over at Cal Poly Humboldt. And yeah, let's dive in. All right, so Redwood Region RISE, what are we? So we are a regional community coalition of close to 1,000 members at this point and still growing. And we are working together to develop a 10-year vision for our region. And when I say our region, I mean tribal lands. So that's 32 federally and non-federally recognized tribes in our region, Del Norte, Humboldt, Lake, and Mendocino counties. And we are working together to develop this plan through California Jobs First. So you may have heard SURF at some point, the Community Economic Resilience Fund. That's kind of the previous name. So California Jobs is part of the rebrand of the state. So central to our commitment is creating inclusive opportunities that really uplift what we call priority communities. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And through our planning efforts, we aim to create thriving wage opportunities, so quality jobs, pursue sustainable economic growth, so diversifying our economies, and get us closer to California's goals for a climate-forward future. So that's big picture. So a little bit about our team, our convener team. So we have the California Center for Rural Policy. That's what I'm part of. That's the regional convener. We bring everybody to the table. That's what we're here to do. And then we work closely with Arcata Economic Development Corporation, AEDC. That's our fiscal administrator. And then our outreach and engagement team is North Coast Opportunity in Ukiah and True North Organizing Network up in Del Norte. So together we're the convening team for our region. All right, so a little bit of a step back, California Jobs First. So again, a lot of different names. California Jobs First is kind of the umbrella term. That's the bigger, the state initiative where EDD, OPR, and GoBiz collaborate to really harmonize a lot of these efforts throughout the state. So the Regional Investment Initiative is kind of the new name for SURF. However, I'm going to keep using California Jobs First just because it's a little bit, it makes more sense in general. So what is it, California Jobs First? So it's a $600 million regional economic development program funded through Senate Bill 162 back in 2021. So it's been a long time coming. Our goals in general for California Jobs First are to foster a high road economy across California's 13 diverse regions. And so Redwood Region Rise is one of those 13 regions. To develop long-term economic resilience in the overall transition to a carbon neutral economy. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So in other words, seeding regional economies that are equitable, climate forward, and provide high quality jobs that are desirable to communities. So that's a big picture. And so if we're looking at the different programs that are funded through California Jobs First, you can see there's a whole list there. So we started off with the second one, actually. So the pilot projects, $39 million for those. So those kicked off, I think, a year and a half ago is when they started, but they just received their funding. So those are the kind of projects that we are looking to in our current planning phase to see what the types of projects are that we might be able to fund through California Jobs First as Redwood Region Rise. And so currently as Redwood Region Rise, we are in our planning phase. We're kind of 2/3 on the way. At the end of August this year is when implementation starts and planning ends. And so all of the regions, all of the 13 regions received $5 million to really pull off this work, to bring folks to the table and to get us going. We just had a really great announcement by the governor that all of the 13 regions, including Redwood Region Rise, received $14 million in pre-development funds. So that's the Catalyst Fund. And I'm sure you all know this much better than I do. There's a lot of work that goes into making sure projects are shovel-ready, if you will. So this Catalyst money is really hopefully going to help our region to get ready, to get projects ready to receive the implementation funds. Then there's a tribal funding. We're still waiting on a little bit more clarity on that. There's still a lot of question marks around the timeline, but we're hoping to get more information on that soon. And then, of course, the implementation phase. So that's, I should note here that the Catalyst funding was awarded to each region, just allotted to us to get the projects off the ground. The implementation phase is where it's really going to be more competitive. So we're going to be competing with those 12 other regions to receive that funding. And that's going to be awarded in increments of 100 million per fiscal year. All right, so we're gonna zoom in a little bit more again. So Redwood Region Rise, this is our planning phase flowchart. I'm hoping this is gonna make it a little bit more clear how our tables within our bigger collaborative work together. So when I say collaborative, I mean specifically those 5, what we call core tables and council. So first of all, we have our tribal planning table that's open to all tribal nations in our region. And that's really where a lot of the local needs are surfaced. So people are able to join in either in-person or Zoom meetings and just talk about what they would need to thrive economically. And similar to the local planning tables, that's where our outreach and engagement teams are working in focal groups, having empathy interviews. That's where all those local needs are being surfaced. Then up to the sector planning tables. So we have 4 different sector planning tables that we defined. So we have the arts, culture, and tourism. Then we have the health and caregiving, renewable and resilient energy, and lastly, our working lands and blue economy. So that's kind of the lens that we're looking at all those local needs, and how can we address those on a more regional level through these specific sectors. So that's where the sector strategy work is really taking place. And then, like Beth was saying, our voting member block, and we're hoping to welcome her soon. That's our I'll show you a little bit more in a second, but that's our voting member block endorsed by our communities through an official voting process. And that's where they'll be voting on those strategies and on projects that we hope to put forth. And then we also have our Equity Council. We call them our moral compass. That's the folks that are really making sure that all these bodies are regionally represented, include what we call priority communities, and they keep us on track, basically. Then we have our cross-cutting experts will be working closely with the voting member block. And those experts will bring a lot of knowledge in terms of, transportation, housing, entrepreneurship, all those kind of intersecting topics that are not necessarily covered in the sector planning tables. And lastly, our technical assistants, they help with facilitation and training, etc. So, all right, so on the voting member block, we have 11 state-required partner categories. I'm not going to list them all because you can see them here, but you can see government is represented, labor, workforce development partners, CBOs, community-based organizations, etc. And then a little bit about our priority communities. So when we started off this work, basically a year ago, our planning phase, we had a state definition to work with as far as disinvested communities. However, if you look at our region, technically our whole entire region falls under that definition. So we all technically are disinvested according to that specific definition. So what we did is we worked with our outreach and engagement team to really define within our region what are the communities that could benefit most from these efforts. So this is our list that is also actively still being worked on. All right, so voting member block. So like I said, community endorsed process. We listed all the organizations in our regions, did a whole bunch of work to make sure those were all inclusive, and then community members were able to vote on those for a couple of weeks. And so the voting member block is mostly now filled. We mostly have all our partners in place. There's still some gaps that we're still actively filling. So balanced regionally, like I said, all 11 required partner categories are part of it, and voices from priority communities. And this body really is where the voting is going to happen. So on the specific projects, the priorities, etc. So we're looking at our voting member block to be kind of our leaders of our collaborative. And so zooming in a little bit, the next steps are to really define workforce development criteria. The state has given us something to work with, kind of proposed criteria, but we need to really refine that for our region with a voting member block. And then making sure that our collaborative is sustainable in the long term. So co-chair, kind of the organizational needs that we would have to have. So then also finalize our project rubric, focusing on equity, environment, and feasibility. And again, making those cross-cutting connections. Really briefly, back in December of last year, we delivered our first, what we call regional plan. There was a whole bunch of raw data on our region, specifically looking at where are we as a region in terms of all these sectors that we're speaking of, and where are the opportunities? Where do we want to go? So that was kind of laying the foundation of what we are going to be delivering in August, end of August of this year, is our regional plan part 2. And that is going to be talking about this more of the strategy work. And so the expenditure date for the planning phase is winter of 2027. And so our next steps is really kicking off, like I said, the strategy work, finding out how the local needs can be addressed on a more regional level. Also, the state has a bunch of deadlines they're throwing at us. So public comment period for draft implementation. And again, finalizing the project rubrics, etc. And then hopefully by the end of August, we'll have our 10-year vision for our region. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is there Supervisor Madrone?
Thank you for your presentation. I've been hearing great things about this collaborative and the work it's doing. So how would one, if one has ideas about development projects that would not just start something out, but as you said, be a catalyst for increased economic development, better jobs, all that stuff, how would you go about submitting proposals and ideas for that kind of thing? I saw a deadline, I think it was like April through June that's happening, but what would be the process to engage?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you so much. So we have a project inventory form that we have on our website, and I'm happy to drop the link or share that with all of you. So initially with the implementation funds, we were looking at basically putting forth 3 to 5 projects. However, the state did a little bit of a workaround, and now we're only going to be pinpointing projects for the Catalyst Fund. So that work is kicking off in May. So really, if you have a great idea, if you have a project and you want to be included to be eligible to receive that Catalyst funding, now is the time to put in your project IGs in our inventory.
So go to the link that we'll be
Yes.
getting from Beth, and then engage at that level.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, with the trail presentations we just had, it's really clear that when tourists come to our community, as well as our local community, the better we have, the more trails we have, and the better maintained and operated they are, the more we're going to encourage more folks to come and spend time and money here in the community. So that's just one quick thought about an area that we could invest in.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah. And that, if I can note, I'm the point person at CCRP for the arts, culture, and tourism sector table, and so that's definitely part of our conversation that we're having. Yeah.
Any other? I don't see any now, but thank you. And I got to see Susan Seaman's presentation in Willits, and now yours. I'm
Great.
getting a firmer grasp on everything.
That's
So.
great to hear. Yeah, it's a lot. So sorry if I went a little fast. It's hard to cover this in 10
No,
minutes.
you covered everything, and I mean, it's one question that hangs in my mind is how the offshore wind project will affect things and its possible delay.
Yeah.
If maybe it gives you more chance to get some training done and get a firm foundation set up to support that. And
Absolutely. Yeah. The resilient and renewable energy sector table is definitely, considering all of this.
all right, well, thank you.
Yeah.
And
Thank you.
that brings us to,
So we'll just.
we have to give I was
oh,
just turning the page
Oh,
over.
sorry. Yeah, we'll take a vote on that one to authorize me to join that voting member block.
So at this time, we would entertain a motion to authorize the executive director to be a signatory to the agreement.
So moved.
So moved. Oh, Jack.
Well, we got a second already then.
I'll be this. Yeah.
Okay. And all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Seeing none. And we have no informational items at this time, but we would entertain the executive director's report.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I do have a few things to mention. Actually, while we're having our meeting, the California Transportation Commission is having their meeting this evening. And one of the main items on that agenda is the STIP, the State Transportation Improvement Program. So I just wanted to fill you all in on the recommendations, the staff recommendations that the CTC was considering. So what we had done was submitted a suite of projects that actually went over our target by about $1 million. And I can just read off some of those because I'm sure it's not just fresh in everyone's mind, but there was some, and most of, all of this is sort of partial funding for various projects at various phases, but there was the Sunset, LK Wood, improvements in Arcata, work towards the Kenmar Road interchange improvements in Fortuna. There's surface rehabilitation on Hubbard Lane. That's in the county's jurisdiction, Eureka area though. Trinidad had a project which was Main Street, Patrick's Point Drive, and West Haven pavement rehabilitation, which actually is a final phase of a project that's had many of their sort of complete street aspects done in prior phases. There was funding for the Beta Zoo Trail, surface rehab overlay on Central Avenue with Class 2 bike lanes, and then two other projects, which were the Garberville Redwood Drive Complete Streets, the planning phases of that project, and then within the Eureka city limits, Myrtle Avenue improvements, including bike lanes. So those were our suite of projects. The CTC staff has recommended approval of all of our projects, so we didn't have to take anything off the list, which was great. We did get bumped in a few of our fiscal years, so some of those projects are going to have to wait a little bit longer than we originally proposed, but nothing got taken off the list. this. So this was all reported to the TAC. They were pretty happy with this outcome. So I'm assuming that at today's hearing, while we've been here, that the CTC has been, likely following staff recommendations. But I just wanted to give you an update that is going through the process and was really good news for us, especially being a little bit over our target. There were other jurisdictions, mainly the very large ones throughout the state, that really had some projects cut or not be funded. So I felt really grateful to see ours be maintained. And then also, you may remember it was a few months ago already, but your board authorized contracting with Studio 6, which is a marketing firm for transit marketing. This is where we're supporting Humboldt Transit Authority on their marketing efforts to increase transit ridership. The Studio 6 team is with the contracts in place, and they're coming out to do a site visit. They'll be in town April 29th through May 3rd. And the last 2 days of that site visit is actually a full photo shoot with transit. So they'll be on the buses. We are looking for some local celebrities, which includes all of you qualify as local celebrities. So we'll be reaching out, if anybody is particularly interested in seeming very happy getting on or off a transit bus during that time, we'd love to connect with you. So you can reach out if it's a burning desire. And if not, if we don't have volunteers, I'll be reaching out to some of you for maybe a little nudge into volunteering. But what we're hoping to get out of this site visit, there's a lot of other things going on beyond the photo shoot, but really, we get a very professional transit photographer and a whole team that will be, kind of really needing to coordinate very, very succinctly for those couple days. But we really are hoping to get literally hundreds of photos to have in our inventory, so that as we move on with marketing efforts over the next few years, we have a really great, professionally done, kind of base to draw from. So we want to make sure that these photos include the full range of people of our community, and that we can draw from them for quite a while, because it's not very often we get this chance to bring, a really professional team out and do this kind of work. So we're excited about it. We have some different ideas. We'll be reaching out to all of you for more ideas, but looking forward to getting that started. So just heads up on that. And then last thing is far less fun, but we have turned in I've requested of all of you the Form 700. I think we've got quite a few back, which is great, but feel free to turn those in anytime. And also, if you have turned them in for other purposes, which I'm sure you all have, that's wonderful. And you can just submit another one directly to us as well. So one for your other organizations is not going to cover us here at HCOG. We each need to, each organization has to submit for themselves. So you can use your work from the prior one, but we do need our own copy. So just that announcement, and that concludes everything I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
You mentioned some of the projects were pushed back a year or two. Which were those?
The county projects. It was Hubbard Lane got pushed back to the end of the STIP cycle, which that's year 28-29. And then the other one that got kind of flip-flopped on its funding was the Garberville Complete Streets project. And that one still starts the same year, but with less funding in the start year. So it's still starting 25-26, but with not as much funding. So the phases were just going to have to go a little slower, but the start time stays the same on that one. But it was those two projects, and we did turn them in with priorities. Hubbard Lane was considered our lowest priority when we turned it in, and that was because it was actually one we needed to do an amendment to add it to the RTP. It wasn't kind of on the list already, so that was ranked our lowest priority. The Garberville project was among our highest priorities, but it had a pretty hefty price tag, so I think that one was explaining kind of the delay on that one.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks for that. And thanks for the good news portion of it. And we'll roll with the not so good news. Caltrans reports.
Hi. So we were really excited with the news from City of Arcata being awarded the grant through the Reconnecting Communities Highways to Boulevards program for the Arcata CAP project. Project will address mobility challenges caused by US 101, State Route 255, and State Route 299 in Arcata. There were only 3 projects selected statewide, and Arcata competed in the rural category, so we'll be working with headquarters as that develops. The Indianola interchange, the work has paused due to weather and wet site conditions. We expect to resume in April with the installation of the support columns. And Fern Bridge, there was a public meeting on Tuesday that went well. There'll be another public meeting this summer, and we anticipate the project initiation document or PID to be delivered in summer 2025. And next, after that, we'll start seeking funding for the next phase. The Broadway Complete Streets project design phase targeted for completion in June 2024, with construction targeted to begin in the beginning of 2025. And then the Eureka 5th Street sidewalk construction that's right outside here. We're upgrading pedestrian ramps, sidewalks, driveways, traffic signals to include audible pedestrian signals. And the significant bulk of that work should be done July 1st, and the next phase will be plant establishment and other minor work. The Eureka Slough Bridge, there are two alternatives, one a seismic retrofit and the second replacement of structures. There was a public outreach meeting on March 12th, and we'll continue to work with the community as this moves forward. And lastly, the Herrick Mobility Hub survey, we're exploring ways to upgrade the Herrick Avenue Park and Ride mobility to a mobility hub. We currently have a survey out that'll be open through the end of April, and we're just hoping to capture feedback on how that would meet the needs of users. And also, one other thing I wanted to mention was we're in the process of updating the Caltrans milestone reports that are in the board package, try and simplify them, make them a little more user-friendly, and also include a map. So any feedback that you might have to improve those reports and make them easier for you to use, just let me know.
I like the ones we get at the North Deal.
I know,
You can
yeah.
read 'em.
We've been talking about that. I think over time we'll continue to improve on them and, add more information.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Question?
Yes.
Thanks for your report. On the Eureka Slough bridges, you mentioned there was two alternatives. One's a earthquake retrofitting. The other is complete replacement. I had heard that with that replacement, we would get a very nice dedicated pedestrian bicycle separated thing, much like the Mad River bridges had. So I would just like to speak strongly for that alternative. I know it's clearly far more expensive, but I believe that the Great Redwood Trail was proposed to ultimately come over and connect to that rather than using the railroad trestle across the river, which then allows the potential for speeders to come back as part of that, Eureka halfway out kind of thing, part of our economy. But I'm hoping we can do the full replacement. It seems well overdue, and instead of putting money into a couple of old structures that it won't improve pedestrian and bicycle safety. And a lot of people come across that bridge. You see pedestrians on there all the time on that little skinny thing. So just wanted to speak for that.
Yeah.
Of course,
Thank
there'll
you.
be public process and all that. Yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, thank you for that. And on to PAC member reports.
Thank you. I wanted to highlight a couple of things upcoming for HTA. Really just one update is that our hydrogen bus is in production. So some of you may remember that we are ordering a hydrogen bus. It's being made to unique specifications because the demo model didn't suit our long distances. And so we're going to have that fabricated by December of this year. And then I wanted to highlight some of our every month we get stats and financial statements. They're a couple months behind because it takes a little while to process all the data. So I do have the December report about our ridership and wanted to note that between the current fiscal year to date and the prior fiscal year to date, there was a 5% increase in ridership. So we are still hoping to see that going up and going up consistently more with the marketing and all the things we're doing collaboratively with HCOG. There was a 19%, actually not a 19% increase, but the fare box revenue is at 19%. So it needs to be above 10%, and the remainder is essentially a subsidy. So we look to see that go up. And so that's looking pretty healthy for our systems. And there's been a significant increase in the use of the Jack Pass. So that's great, seeing that students are really returning to using transit. So just wanted to highlight a couple of those things, and I'll probably on a quarterly basis or so emphasize what's going on with our stats. But it's great to see that change, even in the kind of rainy winter months. We're still seeing that percentage change, slowly but surely trending upward.
Well, thank you. It'll be interesting to see the hydrogen bus in use and see if there's any local adopters of that may not want to go fully electric, but see that as an alternative. So something to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should note we will have initially, so our request for proposals for the construction of the hydrogen fueling station is open right now. We have 2 prospective proposers, and so that's good to see. We would have liked to have more, but we'll have at least 2 proposing on that. But one of the attributes of that project is that there will be over-the-fence fueling, so we will be able to fuel fleet vehicles and, eventually medium and heavy-duty vehicles as more of those convert to hydrogen. So everyone's going to be kind of under the same requirements to, move away from fossil fuel-powered vehicles in all sectors. So we are prepared for that to provide fueling. So it's great that this project will also allow us to meet a local need, and including for potentially some of your agencies. So,
Well, thank you. Any other questions? None. Any board members have anything to report? Seeing none. Oh, wait.
I have a couple. So real quickly, there was a CalCog board meeting last week, and a couple of the main topics were the REAP funds and also RENA numbers. And so just to update all of you that CalCog is still working on generating opposition to the pullback of the REAP funds that has happened. And the executive director of CalCog was the only non-state speaker who was invited to actually testify and speak about that. So kind of just shows the value of that organization that we're a part of. And then Assembly Member Friedman has a letter regarding REAP, and I'm not sure if it's made its way to our office or not, but she's looking for co-signers on that letter for REAP. So we should look for that. And then as far as RENA numbers, I know we've talked about, there's been some of us in our area who have questioned the calculation of the population and the numbers and those type of things. And apparently we are not the only ones that have those questions. So there is, it's Assembly Bill 2485, and it's specifically about transparency in the RENA number process. And it's sponsored by the Sacramento County Association of Governments. And CalCog as a membership voted to support that. So that's probably something that we should pay attention to as it's coming up. And then just to say a little bit more about what was talked about earlier in the awarding of the money to pilot the program of reconnecting communities. Several people from Caltrans and Cal Poly and Arcata got to travel down to San Francisco for that press conference, and it was pretty exciting. Mayor Matthews of Arcata got to be one of the people that spoke and gave a speech, and Councilmember Stillman was able to join us, which was pretty neat because her story ties back into the early 70s when they were wanting to have the freeway be much larger. And I know it's hard for us to imagine that it was, wanting to be, 6+ lanes, but that's originally what was proposed. And that group of people at the time was able to get it back down to 4. So it was really cool to have her be there for that press conference as we're talking about the damage that is done to communities through transportation and freeways and other things, and how we can work to repair those damages. So it was a pretty neat thing to be a part of.
Thank you. Any other?
Chair Johnson, may I make an
Yes.
out-of-turn comment? I wanted to note that Alex Stillman is the vice chair now of the Humboldt Transit Authority. And so hi, Alex. Thank you for being here today. And we'll be coming to this meeting in my stead at least once in the coming year, probably more. So thanks, Alex, for stepping into that role.
Thank you. Well, it appears our business for today is done, and we will adjourn. Thank you all for participating and for the information.